Hey, so in this video, we're going to look at the money market. The money market is essentially our graph for monetary policy for Unit 4, so make sure you guys pay close attention. What concert only costs 45 cents? 50 Cent featuring Nickelback. All right, let's go. All right, so the money market, or in other words, our graph for Unit 4, our graph for monetary policy. And so we're going to start off with our demand curve, or in other words, the demand for money. And so we know, right, at any single given moment in time, people are going to demand cash, or they're going to demand M1 money, right? Money in their checking account, cash, whatever liquid asset that they have. And so we are going to say that people are going to demand money for two different reasons. Number one, the transaction demand for money. In other words, people demand money because they need to buy things, right? If you didn't have any money, then you can't pay for anything, which means you can't get anything. And so people demand money so they can pay for groceries. They can pay for the new PS5. They can pay for whatever they need to get or want to get. Number two is our asset demand for money. People demand money, right? Because it's a safer bet to really invest in, or they know the value of money is going to hold. And so that is the second reason as to why people demand money. And so what happens to our quantity demanded of money when interest rates increase? Well, our quantity demanded is going to fall. Why? Well, because individuals will prefer to have interest earning assets instead, right? When interest rates are high, people want to keep their money in the bank and aren't going to demand as much money, right? Because they would rather earn the interest, right, on just keeping their money in the bank. But let's say when interest rates decrease, what happens to our quantity demanded for money? Well, the quantity demanded for money is going to increase, right? Because when interest rates are low, there is little to no incentive to keep your money in the bank, right? You aren't going to earn as many sort of assets or interest, right? So you might as well take it out and spend it. And so here, notice, right, that there's an inverse relationship between the interest rate and the quantity of money demanded. When interest rates are high, our quantity demanded for money is going to fall. When interest rates are low, our quantity demanded for money is going to increase. So in other words, right, this is what our demand curve looks like for the money market. Notice, right, on the y-axis is nominal interest. So it's not real interest, but we're looking at nominal interest. On our x-axis, we're looking at our quantity of money. And then obviously we have our downward sloping demand for money curve, right? Because that inverse relationship between interest, right, and the quantity demanded for money here. So of course, right, our demand for money, just like aggregate demand, can shift either to the left or to the right. So if our demand for money curve shifts to the left, there's a decrease in the quantity of money. If it shifts to the right, there's an increase in the quantity of money. And so there's only three things that can really shift our money demand curve. One is going to be changes in price level. When price level increases, or in other words, there is more inflation, the demand for money increases and it shifts to the right. Why? Well, if there's higher price levels, that means the prices of all goods are going to increase, so people need more money to pay for the same exact good, right? Example, let's say the gallon of milk costs $2 and there's inflation. Well, now that same $2 gallon of milk is now $4. So people are going to demand more money to pay for that now more expensive milk. Number two, change in income. When people make more money, they're going to demand more money. When people make less money, they're going to demand less money. And lastly, changes in technology, right? If there's an increase in technology or an advent that makes making money or taking money out easier, right, that's going to increase our demand for money. So think like Venmo and stuff like that, that increase the demand for money there. Well, that brings us to our supply for money, right? So we talked about the demand curve. Now let's talk about the supply curve. Well, the supply curve is set by a central bank and is independent from the interest rate. our central bank is just known as the Federal Reserve. Right? So whenever you see the word central bank, you have to insert in your mind the Federal Reserve. And so the Federal Reserve is nonpartisan, right, government office that adjusts the money supply to influence the economy. So this is essentially monetary policy. So if our economy is in a recession, the Federal Reserve is going to adjust the money supply to help bring the nation out of the recession. If we're in an inflationary gap, the Federal Reserve is going to shift the money supply to bring us back down to full employment. And yet again, this is known as monetary policy, right? So in not our next video, but the video after, is going to look at monetary policy. What are the different tools that the Federal Reserve has, right, within monetary policy here? And so because our supply for money doesn't easily change, right? It isn't really, we said it's independent from our interest, it is a perfectly vertical curve. So we have our downward sloping demand for money curve, we have our perfectly vertical supply of money curve, and where they intersect, right, is going to get us to the nominal interest rate, equilibrium, as well as the current quantity of money. And here we said, right, that monetary policy is just the Federal Reserve adjusting the supply of money. So here, if the money supply increases, as we see in this graph, right, our supply of money curve shifts to the right, there's a temporary surplus of money will occur at the 5% interest. The surplus is going to cause the interest rate to fall down to 2%. How does this affect aggregate demand? Well, how this impacts aggregate demand is, A, that is going to increase the supply of money, decrease the interest rate, which is going to increase investment spending. You can say consumer spending or whatever, it is going to increase spending. Why? Well, remember, right, there is an inverse relationship between the quantity of money demanded and our interest rate. When interest rates are low, there's less incentive for people to hold on to their assets, right, because they're earning less interest. So they're going to demand more money, spend more money, which is going to increase aggregate demand. Well, the opposite is true too, right? If our money supply decreases as shown by our leftward shift of our supply of money curve, right, there's going to be a temporary shortage of money at the 10% or 5% interest. So how does it impact aggregate demand? Well, we decrease the supply of money, right? That increases the interest rate, which at that point is going to decrease investment spending, right? Why? Well, because with the higher interest rates, people are less likely to spend because they want to keep their assets in the bank to earn that higher interest. And so because there's less spending, that is going to decrease aggregate demand. And so the last thing that we have to talk about is the Federal Reserve. And so Federal Reserve, created in 1913, they are basically the nation's bank, right? Our government's bank. And so that's why we're also going to use the term central bank to describe the Federal Reserve here. And so in our next video, we are going to discuss the tools that the Federal Reserve has to help regulate our economy. Or in other words, we're going to look at monetary policy. All right, so that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you guys learned a lot, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.